Good morning, boys and girls, Great Lakes Academy middle schoolers. It is Mr. Manta here, and I want to welcome you to our third lesson of this new Unit 6 that we're doing all about chemistry. You should be watching this on Wednesday, April 15th, and we're going to go ahead and jump right in, starting us off with a do now. I've got 4 questions for you. Go ahead and make sure that you have your science notebook out. You have today's heading down, and for our do now, number it numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And those numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the questions that you see right here. Go ahead and pause the video, write the answers for these questions in your notebook, and when you unpause, I'll show you the answers, and we'll see if we got them correct. Pause the video and do it now. Okay, I'm assuming you have now unpaused. You have answered these questions on your own. The answers that we got for you are, number 1, everything made of matter is really made up of tiny particles. That's what we learned about yesterday. For number 2, to describe in your own words what are the particles in a solid doing, well, your words might not match mine exactly, but the basic idea, yours should be similar to mine, should be that they are locked together in a solid shape. They are all holding each other together, kind of holding each other in place. We looked at this animation yesterday when we talked about the 3 states of matter, gases, liquids, and solids, and we saw that in a solid, the particles, as you can see down here, are all really tightly connected to each other and kind of holding each other rigidly in place so they can't move around. For number 3, describe in your own words what are the particles in a gas doing. Well, as you can see in the diagram right here, they're flying around all over the place. Again, your words might not match mine exactly, but that's the same basic idea. They're bouncing off of things, they're flying all over the place. And number 4, you can change matter from one state to another by changing its temperature. In that case, your words should exactly match mine. That's how you change something's state of matter. You heat it up or you cool it down, and maybe it will freeze or it will boil or it will melt, depending on what you do to it. Alright, those were our 4 answers for our do now. I also wanted to start today off with a quick shout out. I want to give a big time shout out to 2 of my students, Ali and Aliyah Reese. Earlier today, I was sitting planning today's lesson when I got a video call through the Google account, like Google Hangouts or something, of Ali calling me for a video call. And Aliyah came on over and we had a good chat and we caught up on how things have been going so far. He even got Miss Merrick and Miss Perry in on the call. It was a great time. So props to them for doing that. I also wanted to show you guys this, which they've been showing me. Their mom told me that they've been doing this recently. This is a chamber or a kind of... I don't even know what the right word for it to call it is. A nest, almost maybe, for praying mantises that Miss Reese said that she got from a friend of hers. And so they are doing their own science project, since we're not in science class, and trying to hatch some praying mantis babies in this nest, which sounds super cool. Or maybe a demonstration that Mr. Manta will use for future science classes down the road. But I had a great time chatting with you guys today. That was super fun. I also wanted to give a proposal, make a little suggestion for science class, since I had so much fun chatting with Ali and Aliyah today. And that proposal is this. Would you, students of Purdue, Tennessee, and Georgia Tech, be interested in having an optional video chat with all of your classmates? Also, if you are interested in doing that, does the device that you're doing Google Classroom on have a camera so that we could video chat? Here's the thing, I'm thinking about trying to put together a big classroom video chat so everyone can chat and say hey and catch up with each other. Maybe at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. And I want you guys to let me know if that's something that you would be interested in. So go ahead and leave a comment in the video below if you are in fact interested in that. If you don't want to do that, then you don't have to say anything. That's fine. You don't need to leave the comment saying, I don't want to do that. I just want to see how many people leave comments saying, yes, I want to do that, and I can do that, because the tablet or whatever that I'm doing Google Classroom on has a camera on it. I want to shout out for this suggestion to Michelle, Michelle Moore from Purdue, who has been on me saying, hey, Mr. Manta, we want to chat with each other. Can you please try to put together a video call so we can all say hey to everyone? And I miss seeing you guys too, so maybe we can get that together later this week, depending on how many comments I get. Alright, now, moving on. We have to actually talk about today's lesson, really get to some science. Today, we're going to be talking all about properties. Now, when I say property, you might be thinking something like what this frog is talking about here. When you tell somebody to get off your property, property isn't something that you own. But that is not what I'm talking about whatsoever when I talk about properties in science class. Instead, we're going to talk about today's big question, which is, what do we mean, in science at least, when we talk about the properties of stuff? When we say that stuff or matter has various properties. It's an important scientific word to have a good grip on because we're going to be talking about properties a lot over these next several lessons and as we get into the more advanced chemistry questions. So to find out what it is that we mean when we talk about properties, we're going to Crash Course. Alright, I'm going to hop out of this really quickly, pull up our Crash Course video, and as usual she goes pretty quick, but I think you guys will be able to handle this concept. But listen closely.
Hey guys, remember what it was like in preschool? If you don't remember, here's a reminder. It was way easier. Playing with colored blocks, learning shapes, those were the days. Good times. But here's a fun fact. When you were learning how to put all those yellow blocks in a line or stuffing square-shaped blocks through a square hole, you were also learning something very fundamental, and that is how to judge an object's properties. But what do we mean when we talk about the properties of stuff? Well, let's start with this. The stuff that makes up everything is called matter. Doesn't make any difference if it's a tiny grain of sand or all of the air that surrounds the Earth. Everything is made of matter. And a property of matter is just any characteristic that we can list about it, like how it looks, feels, or acts. For example, my characteristics include having black hair, wearing glasses, having some wicked awesome nerd cred, and, well, you get the idea. Properties of matter are also things that we can observe. This means that they have differences that are big enough to notice. For instance, I'm currently observing that my desk is messier than it was 5 seconds ago. And to round it out, properties of matter are also able to be measured. That is, we can compare objects to each other. But instead of just looking at them and getting a general idea of how they compare, we measure them by using tools that give us values or numbers. Now, let's put all of these ideas to work by demonstrating how we can find a few basic properties of a simple object. Let me grab my measuring tape. Okay, look. I know I was just talking about how fun it was to play with blocks, but let me be clear. I am not playing with these blocks. This is science, people. Now, let's start with a couple of questions. 1. What properties does this block have? Well, there are some properties that we can observe, but we can't really measure or describe them with numbers, like this block's color, or what it's made of, or even the fact that it holds its shape, which makes it a solid. So a better question to ask might be, what can we observe and measure about this block? Let's start with the big one here. Length. Length is just the distance of something from end to end, and this block's length is 8.5 centimeters. Width, meanwhile, is the distance of something from side to side, and its width is 8.5 centimeters. Height. That's an easy one. It's the distance of an object from its bottom to its top, not to mention a major factor in being able to play basketball successfully. And the height of this block is 9 centimeters. So length, width, and height are some of the most commonly used properties, but there are a lot of others too. For instance, our block is also an object shaped like a box that takes up space. That is, it fills up the space it's in. We call that space the block's volume. We can measure the volume of this block using math based on the measurements that I just made. But we can also get a more general idea of its volume by making other observations. Like the medium block easily fits into the bigger block, so we know that the medium block has less volume than the bigger block. But there's no way the medium block is fitting into the little block, so we know that the medium block has more volume than this small block. Finally, weight is another measurable property of matter. Weight just tells us how heavy an object is. When you go to a doctor's office and they ask you to stand on a scale, they're using that scale to measure your weight. Got it? Good. So, all matter has properties, and properties are observable, measurable characteristics that we can use to tell them apart. And we got to know some of the most common and useful properties that we can put a value or number on, like length, width, height, volume, and weight. So, hey, blocks. Not just for little kids, also super handy for doing science.
Alright, and there you have it. So to jump back to our PowerPoint and to recap on some things, she made 3 basic points in this video all about properties. We're going to run through each of them, and yes, as usual, you should be noting all of these down in your own notebook. First of all, first key point, a property is any characteristic used to describe matter. And when I say any characteristic, I really mean any kind of characteristics. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of words and things we can use to describe properties. I have a whole bunch of examples for you. You could talk about an object being soft, describing the property of its texture. You You talk about it being transparent. We learned what it means last week. You talk about an object's size, like saying that it's bigger than a microwave. You talk about whether it's magnetic or not. You could talk about how old it is, whether it's 1 year old or 100 years old. You could talk about what it's made of, like if something's made of metal versus made of wood. You could say that something's color is a property, if it's orange or green or blue. The way that it feels, if it's spiky versus smooth. You could talk about its height, if it's 200 feet tall versus 2 feet tall. You could talk about its temperature, like is something over 9,000 degrees hot. And you could even talk about something's taste, like whether it's spicy. All of these different words that you're seeing here are examples of properties. You've been using properties since you could first speak. You've been using them. You might not have been noticing, hey, this is a property of matter. You might not be thinking about it that way, but you're very familiar with properties because you've been living in the world full of objects with properties for 9, 10, 11, 12 years now. Second key point they made is that properties can either be measured or observed. Meaning if you want to get at an object's properties, you can either measure them with a tape measure or a scale or some kind of tool, or just observe them straight up. The example that we had in the video was that she measured the width of this block and found that the block is 8.5 centimeters wide, and the tool that she used is this tape measure to do so. She also made observations, though, in the video, for example, that the block is smaller than the little block. She observed its size by saying, well, it doesn't go into this other block, so it must be smaller than it. Properties can be measured or observed. Now, if you stop to think for a second, all the way back to the start of the year in science, in Unit 1, there's an idea we talked about that sounded very similar to this concept of measuring versus observing properties. You think all the way back, maybe like the third lesson we ever had was all about pictures like this, where Mr. Manta would ask you to make a quantitative and a qualitative observation. And we said quantitative observations are things that you can measure with numbers, and qualitative observations are ones that you can just see or hear or touch or otherwise observe with your 5 senses. So this is really the same basic idea. It's a connection all the way to the start of the year. That properties can be measured or they can be observed, which would produce a quantitative or a qualitative observation. The third point they also made is just giving some examples of common types of properties. Some of these will be from the video, some of these will be new, but my examples of some common types of properties, you can always describe something's color as a property, its material as a property, its shape, its texture, its temperature. You could also measure things like length, width, height, volume, and weight. All of these things are different examples of properties that matter can have. But no, this list is not all of the properties. There's even way more properties than this, and we'll keep hearing about more types of properties than what you're seeing in this list. But what this list is good for is if you're ever asked to name all the properties you can think of for a given object, you can think, okay, well, what's its color, what's the material, what's the shape, and so on. And doing that's going to be very useful for today's first and only classwork question. That classwork question is to choose an object that's somewhere close by. Maybe something that's sitting on your desk right now, or is somewhere in a room or somewhere else in the house. Tell me what the object is that you chose, and describe as many properties of it as you can think of. In order for your work to count as complete, I need you to give me, we'll say, at least 4 properties, and I want to see who can name the most. I'd be really impressed if someone could name more than 10 properties from one object, but I think you could do it. It could be done. All right. At this point, our lesson's actually pretty much over, and some of you might be thinking, this seems really easy, Mr. Manta. She was playing with blocks, doing preschool stuff. Did we really need a whole lesson on this? I've been, you guys have been talking about things being soft or big or small or red or blue since you were babies, basically. So did we really need a whole 5th grade, 6th grade chemistry lesson on things having properties? To that I would say, you're right. First of all, today's lesson was kind of easy. As long as you get the idea that objects have properties we can describe, you're good. But also, as far as for why we had a whole lesson on this today, you'll have to find out next time. Not on Dragon Ball Z, but in science class. We're going to follow up with this idea of properties with a few more lessons from here. Sorry, it's a bit of a cliffhanger. Tune in tomorrow. Alright, from there we're going to have our independent practice. You guys can pop out your notebooks again and number them. This time you're only going to need numbers 1 through 8. We have 8 questions, and those 8 questions are right here. Go ahead and pause the video and write out the answers to these 8 questions in your notebook now. And I'm assuming you have now completed that. Have unpaused the video to see the answers. Answers are right here. Number 1, anything that has weight and takes up space is called matter. Number 2, all matter is made up of particles. That's what we learned yesterday. Number 3, a characteristic we can use to describe matter, like how it looks or feels, is a property. Number 4, you can find properties by either measuring or observing. You don't have to have those in the right. You could also say observing or measuring. The order doesn't matter. But those are the 2 words that you need to know. Number 5, in the Crash Course video, Sabrina used a tape measure to measure the block's length, width, and height. Each of those is a property of its own. Number 6, a scale measures the property of weight. Number 7, if I tell you that a cloud is white, the property I'm describing is its color. It's one type of property. And 8, if I tell you that a basketball is a sphere, the property I'm describing is its shape. Something's shape is another type of property. Go ahead and in the classwork questions for today, in addition to answering that one question we had, as always, star the questions you got correct in your notebook and fix the answers you got wrong. Then in today's classwork form, check off all of the answers that you got correct. Alright, ladies and gents, that's all we had for today. That makes it exit ticket time. Today's cool thing is not a link or anything. It's just a reminder to go ahead and tell me in the comments if you want to video chat with the class sometime soon. I don't want people to forget about that. So if you want to do that, go comment that first, then knock out the exit ticket. I will see you folks tomorrow. Alright, so long.